can ask, think, just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, Lord.
Well, welcome to what I call Preacher Conversations. And then we have a special segment that's called Women of the Word. And we have Tiffany Garner.
Hello. Thank you for having me today.
Well, it's my pleasure. It's my honor to have you for this interview on today. And this is February, and it's kind of warm here, 34 degrees compared to other places. What's the weather like where you are?
Listen, last night it was 17, so we hovered about 30s too.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, tell us where are you, Tiffany, and then we'll get into the interview.
Yeah, so I am in Woodbridge, Virginia. So that's still the Northern Virginia area. About, I guess most people would know DC. So it's about 40 minutes south of DC. That's probably a good marker. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, for the audience, who is Tiffany Garner? Tell us something about yourself. Well, I almost said, tell us what you want us to know, you know.
I know, right?
Yeah, right.
Oh, goodness.
But who is Tiffany Garner?
Who is Tiffany? Okay. Well, that's always an interesting question because I'm like, okay, where do we begin? But no, so Tiffany is I am a woman that lives here in Northern Virginia area. I worship with the Fairfax Church of Christ out in Fairfax, Virginia, so not too far from Woodbridge. I have been in the church pretty much all my life. I think that's all I know. But I love the church and I love serving and love being active. But I also, in addition to my work in the church, I am my job, which I feel like is a little bit of a calling too. I feel like that bleeds into my church work. Is I work in federal policy. So I have done some lobbying, and now I just kind of work on with members of Congress to try to pass legislation that impacts families every day. And that's what the church is about. It's comprised of families. But, it's so interesting, living in this world and so many other challenges. So it's great. I'm grateful to be able to work and do some of the, I guess more secular stuff, but it impacts the families in the church. So I feel like I get, experience with understanding what's happening. And then I can bring that to the church and figure out ways that we can, minister and serve better. So I feel like, that's a snapshot of who I am, kind of what I do all the time.
Well, we're going to talk about your work a little later, but you said you grew up in the church.
Yeah.
Which church? Where is that church? And where is home now? Northern Virginia is your home now, but where did you grow up? Tell us about that now.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I know I live in Northern Virginia, but home is an interesting word because I still feel like home is still back home in Winston-Salem, but born and raised Carver Road Church of Christ is my home church where Brother Jefferson Carruthers is a minister now. And so that's where I grew up. Been in the body since I was I think I was baptized into the body about 8 years old. So I was young, but it was one of those situations. I mean, I've been in Sunday school since I was able to talk. And so just learned about the word. And so was baptized and then been pretty much active ever since. So yeah, that's home, even though I live here in Fairfax now. Okay.
Well, growing up in the church, can you share your come to Jesus experience? Did I hear you say that you were baptized around 8 years old?
Yeah, I was young, but it was that time. So I come from my mother, raised by my mom. She's very active. Denise Garner. She has the Sunshine Ministry at Carver Road, but being, my mother has been very active in the church. And so, she allowed me, of course, at home when just learning more and more about God, but also, like I told you, being raised in the church, going to Sunday school, I just got to a point where we kept hearing about it, or I kept hearing about it and being taught. And then I think one day I told my Sunday school teachers, I remember their names, Sister Hetty Rice and Sister Katanya Eccles. Katanya Eccles is the wife of Lonnie. That's not Eccles anymore, Lonnie Smith. But anyway, she's a minister's wife. But I remember her, they're teaching our class, and I just told them one day, I was like, I think I want to be baptized, right? And so Brother Cloyd Cecil was the minister at the time, and so they took me to the office, and I was like, let's talk about it, and I want to do it. And so, of course, we went through that, and I was baptized that day. And so, I was young, but I knew, at least I knew the basics, right? Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, good. 8 years old. Carver Road Church of Christ, Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Yeah.
Where did you go to college? Anything like that? And then I want to get into how did you get involved in the work that you're doing now? So from Winston-Salem to Northern Virginia, what was your journey like?
Yeah. So Winston-Salem, I finished, graduated from West Forsyth High School out in Clemens, and then I went on to UNC Charlotte. So I spent about 14 years down in Charlotte, North Carolina. Went to school at UNC Charlotte, stayed, and just started working there. I went just really quickly. I got my degree in counseling. So I was a mental health counselor. So working with the county, started doing some work around domestic violence and helping families. And then from there, I kind of got burnt out. I did that for about 7.5 years, and I needed a little bit of a break. So came up here to Northern Virginia I have some family that live here. And I said, let me just have a fresh start, a new chapter. But we all know this. Sometimes when we run from what God really wants you to do, I ended up right back in the same space of working and serving families. So that's, a lot of the work I do now. But that's how I ended up here in Northern Virginia, trying to run and start a new chapter, but then ended up back in the same space. But it's been a good move. It was a leap of faith, and I'm glad I did it, though.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think all of us have had those moments, leap of faith, and not knowing how it's going to turn out, but it turns out the way God wants it to turn out, that kind of thing.
Does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, yeah. I have 3 children, and they're probably, I've got a Gen X and I've got a millennial. Well, I think I've got 2 Gen X's and 1 millennial. Do you mind me asking where you fall? What generation?
Of course you can ask. Okay. Listen, I'm a millennial. Go ahead.
Well, you might say I can ask, but that don't mean you're going to answer it, okay?
That's right. You can ask. No, I'm going to tell you too. No, I'm a millennial, but I always tell people I'm in the back. I'm in the back. So, we hovering in our late 30s. So, but, it's all good. So, millennial.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And
yeah.
I try to connect with the generations, and I learn from the millennials and Gen X, and millennials sometimes get a bad rap, and so I wrote a book. It's not their fault,
you did.
It's not their fault, and I think we all have to take some responsibility in whatever is going on at the present time, and make the most of it. But how would you describe? Well, let me ask this first. What's been your involvement in the church? Have you been involved in like ministry, church work, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I have. So I think some of the ministries that have been so important to me is I'm gonna backtrack a little bit. When I used to live in Charlotte, I was active at Sugar Creek Church of Christ, and at that time, and so youth ministry. And I used to be a Sunday school teacher for the high school teen girls. And so I love that. That was such an important part of, just being able to be there with young women as they go through, not only just their spiritual development, but emotional and social, all that, just to be there and to be a consistent force in young teens' lives was a very important ministry for me. And now I can say, just fast forwarding in my present congregation, one of the ministries that I love to be a part of is our outreach ministry. I've done some missionary work, traveled to Africa, done some work. And so our outreach ministry, we focus on local and distance mission work. And so that's been a really important thing to just kind of really, how do we share Jesus outside of the church walls? And how do we go there and be God's heart and hands to the community? So that's probably a ministry that I just love and I'm pretty active in. Yeah. And one other thing I will say is I also kind of hit up our women's conference. I plan a conference every year at Fairfax. So that's another ministry, but the outreach is so good for me just to, because you never know whose life you can touch and who needs to hear Jesus. And they're not like they may not come to church, but they may be in those really dark and hard places. Like we go out and feed the homeless and that type of thing, and just to share words. So I love that work.
Well, good. Thanks for sharing that. When I do this podcast with preachers, I ask them, how do they prepare for their sermons? What their sermon prep is like. Talking with women, the question I want to ask, how do you prepare for your Bible classes, or when you're asked to speak or give a seminar or a lecture? What's your preparation like? How do you go about doing that?
I just honestly, I just take time just to have some silence before I even begin preparation, like just to have some meditation. And I really just ask God and Holy Spirit, please guide my words and my thoughts, that I will say what you want me to say. So that part is critical for me before I just start like researching and writing and stuff. It's just like, let me just pause and be still and ask for clarity on what I'm supposed to say. And then from there, I'll just begin, I'm sure like most of us do, we kind of start doing some research in the word, and I use some study materials as well. But my preparation, I wish I was one of those people that's like, I like start weeks in advance, but not really. Sometimes it's like a couple days before, and I'll just like have that moment. I'm like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to say. Right. So it's a pretty simple thing for me, but the stillness and inquiring is critical. I cannot write or prepare if I don't, seek, guidance on what to say. Yeah.
Well, if when I did some study on millennials, and if you do some reading, people will say that millennials are spiritual but not religious. I've heard that spiritual but not religious. There's another phrase that I'm looking for. They're sort of turned off with church today. What would you say to that? How would you respond to that?
That's a really interesting question. What do we say in a world where, and I'm going to start off by like using examples of, I have, colleagues of mine where it's just like I listen to these conversations about, just wanting to just, you acknowledge God and they know that, he's present, but it's also just needing this freedom to just kind of worship and be and exist in the way that people want to be. And it's a hard thing, because I think people have been so turned off by religion and the structure possibly of, how religion, and feeling boxed in. And so now you have these movements where people are like, I just want to worship and be free to just, serve God the way I want to. Now, of course, there's contradiction, because, God, like, he has requirements on how he wants to be worshiped, but there's just this movement. And how do we start addressing that and speaking up and countering it? I don't have the magic words, because, I just listen to that, just the amount of conversation around, I want to be free to just worship and be me and do my thing, so I think that's a challenge for the church. We got to figure out, how do we counter that? You know?
Yeah. Well, how did you maintain your faith growing up in the church and being a millennial, yet remaining faithful? Now, whoever interviews me, I get to tell my story, and I tell them about my prodigal son years. I was baptized at 7.
Oh, okay.
And then I was rebaptized when I got 20, and I say my years from 16 to 20 was my prodigal son years. I wasn't going to church, that kind of thing, but I came back to the church. But you grew up in the church, and as a millennial, you're faithful to the church. What do you attribute to your faithfulness or staying with the church?
Yeah. It's a good question. I'll start with my mother. I know I mentioned her before, but I was raised in a home where, we were at church Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday night. There was no option. So, just having that steady force of, a mother who was like, we going to church, honey, like whether you want to or not. So I would say that part, but then I also had some good, solid Christian friends that we were, raised in the church together. And so we just all did, we're active in church together in youth groups and stuff. And we just kind of stayed consistently supporting each other. But please don't, misunderstand. We were not perfect, but we knew like church was our center in our community. Like most of our lives revolved around being active in church. So I think it's just between friends. I will say, I had some really solid Sunday school teachers who did instill some good stuff in us, even times when we were kind of rebellious. But, so that was helpful. But I think it was just having a solid church community that just kind of, we were involved in. We had a relative family, like my mom and some other of our church mothers and fathers. They were active and recruited us to do stuff in church. So we were always doing stuff in church. So I just feel like the community helped me to stay grounded. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now you mentioned your mother, and I heard you mention Chloe Cecil and Lonnie Smith.
Yeah.
Are there any other church leaders or members who made a significant impact in your life when you look back over it? Anybody else? And what kind of impact did they make?
Right. Let's see. I have had, again, I'm gonna go back to my roots at Carver Road. I'm gonna lift up brother and sister Gatson. They were teachers. My brother Gatson was a Sunday school teacher of mine at one point. Brother Copeland, Adolphus Copeland, he does the education ministry work, but I remember him being a prominent Sunday school teacher in my life, as well as the Johnsons, Darlene and Simon Johnson. Those were like our high school Bible study teachers. So I know, probably little do they know that I remember their teachings along the way, and just kind of those formative years, they were there. So I would say they have helped out a lot in building a solid foundation for me.
Well, I stay in touch with Brother Carruthers. He and I are good friends. And, and I know all the people you just mentioned.
I bet you do.
And I told them that you and I were working on a project together.
Yeah.
Oh, Tiffany. Oh, they became so protective. Like, they had some good things to say about Tiffany. Okay.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. It was all good. It was all good. It's like you could feel the love and respect that they have for you and everything.
Good. That's good to hear.
You made an impression on them now and everything.
Oh my goodness. But they made an impression on me in formative years. Brother Carruthers came a little bit after I had left to go to college. So, but I go home and talk to him some, when I visit, pass through.
Yeah, well, he's a good guy. We'll give him a pass. He's a good guy.
Okay, we'll give him a pass.
That's my friend, Okay.
All right, cool. We'll give him a pass.
Yeah. Now let's go back to the work that you're doing now.
Yeah.
I heard you say lobbyist, and I heard you mention something about domestic violence.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about what's a day like for you. I guess it depends on what day of the week it is and that kind of thing.
Yes.
Well, let's back up a little bit. How did you get involved in this field of work that you're in now? And tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do.
Yeah. Well, I'll make it short and sweet. So I never, ever intended to work in policy, and never intended to work in DC, nor work in lobbying or Congress. I don't think I knew what any of that really was. So I mentioned to you, I started out as a mental health counselor in Charlotte. I was working with families in domestic violence. And so when I moved up here, I was trying to run away because I was like, I don't want to do domestic violence. Like that was never a fun topic to talk about, right? Because it's really heavy. And most people are like, don't want to talk about that. So I was trying to move into a whole nother world, but God, no, Tiffany, you need to stay in this space. And so now, fast forward, I had just kind of started back into doing a little bit of like training law enforcement around when they respond to domestic violence calls. That's kind of how I jumped back in the arena. And so now I work a lot with policy. So I may work with a day for me now. It's not, I don't work just on domestic violence, but I do policy work that intersects with violence. So that could be anything from, healthcare, Medicaid, how people access, healthcare, to children exposed to violence, a variety of policies, Black maternal health. I work on some of that. But an average day for me varies. I meet with members of Congress to kind of talk about some upcoming legislation they're trying to pass or like their staff. I could be planning a briefing, which is what I'm getting ready to do now, or just kind of doing some reading, going to conferences to try to stay on top of what's happening in the policy space. So I know how to advocate for families and for people on the ground, because these voices are often missing. A lot of people who make the decisions at the top, they often are disconnected from community and disconnected from what people really need. And so I just spend a lot of my energy staying connected, but also trying to influence legislation.
Okay. So a lobbyist does what is a lobbyist? Is that a paid position, or is that a volunteer? And do you have to twist arms and all that kind of stuff? grab them by the neck,
Yeah, all of that. Well, no. So my current work, I was a lobbyist in my last job. Right now I do more advocacy, which they can kind of run hand in hand. So lobbyists is usually companies will hire a lobbyist to go and kind of like lobby for certain issues. Like it could be everything from food to, it could be domestic violence, it could be education. So there's different people that are hired to go and try to influence members of Congress to, include bills and legislation that has their interest in mind, right? Whatever their interests are, which could be so much. And so, people are hired to do that. I, on the other hand, I don't necessarily, while I do work with members of Congress, it's just all about how I try to educate versus influence and really push people to, move and act on a certain issue. Is just a little bit of a distinguishing thing, kind of blurs the lines a little, but lobbying is a big thing. It's a big thing. And I never even knew anything about it till I came up this way. So,
well, let me add, I worked in mental health for a little bit, and then I got involved in church work. And sometimes I don't see much difference,
You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Politics.
Yeah. I mean, but I wanted to get to, do you see your work, what you're doing now, as part of your Christian ministry or part of your contribution to society as a whole? Or is there a difference, or are they integrated? The reason I ask this is younger generations sometimes see their ministry or their calling in the church in aspects of social justice, and not just what we do on Sunday, but what we do outside the walls. Did that impact you in any way, or it's just that you like helping people? So I'm asking a lot of questions just to try to pick your brain about why you do what you're doing.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And you're right. Sometimes I think nowadays it can easily blur the lines, right? Like for me, as I mentioned to you just in my story, like I felt like as much as I try to run away from doing this work, I feel like it's part of like what I'm called, like part of my life's work, what I'm supposed to do. So I do it from a lens of like, okay, well, this is, obviously how I make a living, but also it is a way for me to serve families from an interesting space of policy, although I wasn't always in this space. So I do feel like it's an extension of my purpose and why I'm here. But when it comes to ministry work, I mean, in my everyday work, honestly, it's not like I'm advocating for families, but I don't specifically like we're talking about Jesus, right? So my ministry work, I feel like my purpose and life work feeds my ministry work, because at least I'm informed and I'm just kind of like understanding what's happening in society, right? So then when I do personal ministry work, where we're out, outreach, so I can have a better lens of, okay, well, we're going to serve homeless people. Okay, what's going on with, why are people homeless? And what are some other ways the church can, really help support and interact? But at the same time, I have an opportunity to talk about Jesus, right? So I feel like for me, my life's work bleeds and helps me do my ministry work even more, where I can specifically talk about salvation in Christ. You know what I'm saying? So it runs hand in hand, but, there's a little bit of a difference for me versus what you're saying, a lot of people feel like it all kind of runs together. But truth of the matter is, even in social justice work, you don't have a chance to often talk specifically about Christ, which is what I believe ministry is about. Like, you're leading people to Jesus.
Yeah.
But, so I think those lines can be colored, like blurred nowadays.
Blurred, yeah. That's a good way of saying it. Dr. David Jones, who preached for the Schrader Lane Church in Nashville, he's retired now. But one of the things I remember him saying is that the church ought to look like heaven on earth, and we ought to make the world a better place. So not only are we trying to convert people to Jesus, but we're trying to make them better people. Because if you help someone become a better person, then that's one less person you have to worry about breaking into your house. That's one less person. Like, you got a daughter who's not married, well, she's got a better chance of meeting somebody who has a job, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So we want to bring people to Jesus, and we want them to be better people as well, because we're not going to convert everybody that we meet. But if I can make you a better person, or help you become a better person, a better citizen, that kind of thing, then the world is a better place and everything.
Yes. Agreed.
You mentioned purpose, and that just got me thinking. Barbara Walters told a group of journalists that when you interview someone, don't focus on the question, but focus on the answer, because and then the follow-up question is based on their answer. So you said purpose. I heard you say purpose.
Yeah.
There are some people still looking for their purpose, and so did you decide, or God decided it for you, or you just settled down and said, this is what the Lord wants me to do, and I'm going to surrender to it, or this is what I want to do, and you went after it? How do you see your purpose?
Yeah, and listen, I love that question, because I have not arrived. But when I mentioned about purpose, is just this thing where, like I mentioned to you, like I didn't go to school to work in domestic violence and violence and gun violence and all these other really hard things, that really plague society. And so I've been trying to run away from that. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. Right. So I finally just got to a place where I'm like, God, okay. I wake up in the morning and I'm like, okay, I'm excited. Let me go do my job. Let me brainstorm. What are some new solutions we can do? Right. And so I just had to surrender and say, okay, this must be what I'm supposed to do, because I cannot at this place see myself doing anything else, even though I've tried to run. And so that's why I was like, well, okay, maybe this is what I'm called to do. And let me just embrace it. And even though it's messy and unattractive as it is, because I feel like sometimes, Brother Crusoe, I can be a party killer. And what I mean by that is, you go to events and everyone's sharing what their jobs are. And I'm like, yes, so I work on violence prevention. And it's like, it just takes the wind out of the sails.
Yeah.
So so that's just it. I have surrendered, because I have ran, and I feel like God is like, no. Yeah. I need you to keep staying here,
Yeah. You all these new questions are just generating based on what you're saying.
This is a good conversation. So this is good. Go ahead.
Yeah, it is a conversation. How do you balance things? Okay, young and you're single, and so that gives you more time, perhaps, to do things. Do you travel? How do you balance your life, your work, and your ministry, and your personal life, that kind of thing? Church life, work, and personal life. How do you balance all of that?
That's always the key question. Let's just be honest. I have a lot of work to do in that area of balancing, because I don't know about anybody else, but for me, doing work that's purposeful and you just feel called and led to do it, it's hard sometimes to just cut it off at the end of the day, because I'm like, ooh, there's one more thing, or there's one more thing I need to do. But what I'm learning now, I can't show up and be my best self, right, if I don't take time out to balance and, have fun and play, as I call it, play. But yeah, I do spend time when I'm not working. I travel. I love to go. I do a lot of work in nature. I also am involved in other organizations. Like I do some work with Sierra Club. Like I'm really big into the environment, because it's stuff that really kind of fills my tank outside of, my job. And so I just try to find other things that I have fun with, because I have to. And I think sometimes like we feel like we have to be on and do it and solve all the problems. I'm like, Jesus is probably like, look, you're here to do the work, but you don't exhaust and like kill yourself trying to do what you're called to do. You got to use wisdom, right? So I'm working on that. Yeah.
Well, help me with this. To your generation, with some who are leaving church, some, and here's the thing, here's the talk that I'm hearing. I'm speaking my own truth. There is no absolute truth. We live in a postmodern world now. The worldview is about self. What would you say to your peers who may think about leaving church, not making church a priority? You're in a rare breed, grew up in the church, and still faithful. I don't even look at gaps. Like I said, I got baptized at 7, rebaptized at 20, 16 through 20 had my prodigal son years. But what would you say to your peers if they said, Tiffany, I'm not in the church no more. I don't even want to go to church. I'm going to speak my own truth. What advice would you give to that person?
Another great question. I think I'm slowly just trying to, I'm going to start with this really quickly. I feel like the traditional advice in the past have been like, oh, you need to be at church. You got to be here on Sunday. That traditional response that we've always had where we kind of pressure people like, you should do this, you should do that. I don't think that's going to work anymore. I think for me, what I am shifting to is moving from a place of that you have to be, of course, encouraging, please come to church, but now shifting to more of, well, let's look at you being connected to Jesus, right? Like getting the message from church, because I think turns a lot of people off because of the structure and tradition and all that, but really connecting with people about where they are in their walk with Christ. And really, how do I help them? Well, this is me talking to someone, is just thinking about, what is your relationship and walk with Jesus? And then what has he done for you? And how do you connect with him personally? And how do you find identity and stuff, like just connecting them and to help them see what Christ should mean in their life, not coming from a place of judgment or guilt, but just out of a place of love and connecting people to that love. That's kind of what I'm shifting to, because the church piece is turning people off. But maybe if we go back to, how it really should be, like, wait, it's really all about Christ, right? And once they feel that connection and love and being seen and valued from a savior, then hopefully that will help people get back on track to say, okay, well, let me do what he's asked me to do. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I'm shifting back to.
Well, do you think, see, you had a church background, you had parents that, nurtured you. So maybe that's why you're a little different from others, maybe that has a lot to do with it. Help me with this. This is a personal question, because this just happened to me. I teach, I'm a GED instructor, 2.5 days out of the week. And one of the coworkers, we meet going in, and we just had a little conversation, and she'll tell me things like, well, she got to get a knee operation, but she's too young. The doctor says she's too young. She's only in her 40s, so she's too young to get a knee operation. But she's a problem. So, we chit chat like that, And so just last week I asked her, I said, where do you worship, or where do you go to church? Because, I'm leading up to inviting her to come. And she kind of just blew me away. I wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't quick on my feet. She said, well, me and my family, we just do our own thing at home. We just do our own thing at home.
Yeah.
What would have been a good response to her? So what's my next comeback? When I see her again at work, any suggestions? Help a baby boomer out, okay?
Listen, well, the interesting thing is that I've heard that too. It's like, oh, I do my own thing. We worship at home. And to me, this is again another part of new strategy, Brother Crusoe. Like for me, I'm now at a place of like, well, tell me more. What does that look like at home for you? You seek to understand, then to be understood. There's a Stephen Covey, like a human resources type thing. But seriously, like, oh, so tell me more. And would you, after that person explains what they do, then I'll be like, well, you know what? That's great. I would love to have you come and worship me. But I think us coming from an angle of trying to understand people. Before we dig in and we're like, well, you need to come to church with me. Well, no, let me understand you first, right?
Yeah. Well, you got to understand, I work in the correction facility. So, I'm getting the keys to my classroom and all that kind of stuff.
So you got time for all that.
We waiting for the gate to open, everything.
Yes.
So we can go in. So, but it just caught me, And then I thought, since the pandemic, a lot of people are staying home and they're watching, service and that kind of thing. Yeah. And so I said, well, that puzzled me. That I wasn't ready for that one, and everything. So now I've got to come back. Well, what's that? What is that like?
Tell me more about that.
Tell me more about that. Okay,
exactly.
that's your counseling expertise coming out.
We got to pull from lots of trick, like a bag of tricks here to be like, okay, well, I can't say this, but let me try this. All right.
Yeah. Well, tell me this. What's the current state of the church? I mean, now you grew up in church.
Yeah.
And you're still faithful and you're still involved in church.
Mm-hmm.
Good and bad, or whatever way you see it. How would you describe the current state of the church?
Well, I think the church is, there are some aspects or some sects of the church that are remaining the same and remaining traditional. And, but I question whether we are truly seeing the growth that we need to see by sticking to some of these traditional ways that we go about things. And again, this is not a thing about like doctrinally. I just think that our approach, while it has been good and we want to stay solid with the word, I think we are in a place where we are having to, or we need to re-examine how we are ministering to the congregation, but also how we're reaching out to those who do not know Christ, right? What are some, subjects and issues that maybe we should dive more into and connect more with people? How are we responding to a changing world? For example, this is going to be a little sticky what I'm going to say, but like we have the rise of, just for example, like suicides in the media, right? Well, then how are we in the church addressing stuff like that? And do we even respond? Or even like things around LGBTQ? Like this is stuff that's hard. And I know for forever, we've just kind of pushed on the rug. But seriously, as a church, I think when we think about growth and sustainability, what happens when we stay silent? Even if things are happening in the news and in the media and we say nothing, well, then what does that mean? And then how are we equipping the saints in the church to respond if we're not saying anything? And like speaking up and being that love and light, saying, hey, well, Jesus says this and Jesus loves you. I mean, whatever. I'm just for example, but just those messages to counter what's out there. And so I just think that we really need to look at what silence on certain things is really doing. Is it harming us? Because I think our approach has traditionally been to, okay, well, we're not going to say nothing about certain things. We're just going to stay this course. But I do think we need to be more active and consider and showing up in the world in spaces that maybe we haven't considered.
Sometimes they put a lot of pressure on the pulpit,
They sure do.
a lot of pressure on the pulpit. And in some areas, there may have been silence, but in some areas they have not been silenced.
True.
If you study the history, we just had a pioneer preacher, not necessarily pioneer, but someone who was involved in civil rights just passed in Rochester, New York, Franklin Florence. But now the younger generation wouldn't know about him. But Franklin Florence was a civil rights activist in Rochester, New York, contemporary of some of the guys that we are well known of, like John Lewis and those kind of things. So There have been people in our brotherhood, but I think, do you think there needs to be more sermons or Bible classes to bring awareness, or how do we go about doing that?
Yeah. And please know, like and I don't want to harp on the, the part that needs to change. I think the church is still filled with love, and I think it's there's a lot of good in the church. So please don't, think I'm saying anything like that. But what I guess what's been on my heart is how we respond. And to your point, yeah, I'm sure there are just great leaders such as yourself and many others who are like really brainstorming and trying to think about how to get out there. And it shouldn't rest solely on leadership. Like, we all are the church, that's just you all's role, but we have a responsibility too, right? So I'm just thinking too, maybe there's ways that there can be more Bible studies, but it's Bible studies around sensitive topics. Like, how do we respond to LGBTQ? How do we still show love, right? Because love is going to win. Because I think our traditional way is just like, no, you live in that lifestyle. That's not going to work. I'm just using it for example of ways that we can have special topics to address things that are really concerning in society, and we don't know what to say. Right. But what other ways to be creative? Maybe we can what are ways we can use social media to put positive messages out there, right?
Yeah.
And then how you and I have talked about ways that the church can even get involved to a certain extent with advocacy, showing up in the community and saying, this is where we stand, because this is where Jesus stood. Yeah. And, that doesn't have to take away from church activities and ministry. It can just, in addition to, how are we going to position ourselves to show up in an advocacy space? Because we're standing for issues that impact church families. Right. So that's just things I think we should really figure out, like what makes sense there. Yeah.
Well, you've helped me today. Let me.
I hope so. I don't know what I said that hopefully was helpful.
Well, you said a lot of good things. I like the fact of what the church can do. I like the fact of how you responded to what you would say to your peers, about remaining faithful and having a relationship with the Lord. I just like what you're doing, and that is not just pulpit, but everyone who is church should make a contribution to making the world better. So you said a lot. You said a lot of good things, Miss Tiffany.
Good.
All right. Okay.
Good.
What does the future for Tiffany Garner look like? I mean, Lord willing, what are your plans and goals?
That's right. I wish I had a crystal ball. No, I'm not advocating for that, but you get my point. No. I know God has a plan, and we'll trust that. But immediately, Brother Crusoe is just really working on. We're getting ready to have our women's conference that myself and my team were planning on April 29th at Fairfax. Down the road, I'm just going to continue on with our outreach work, and something personally that I'm getting ready to dive into, because I've been really praying about a personal ministry, like outside of church outreach ministry, is I'm getting ready to start doing some work with women who have lost their children due to gun violence, like a support group. So I'm outside of DC. So DC, of course, is one of many cities flooded. But I was just trying to find a way to, use some of my old counseling skills to really be there in those spaces where it is so much suffering and pain and trauma. And so I'm just connecting with the group there to just start doing some personal ministry and helping some of the women who are really devastated at this time. So that's on the plans for this year. Yeah. So that's all I know at the moment.
Well, you just mentioned gun violence.
Yeah.
Your first response to the latest, and probably by the time that this air, sadly, tragically, there's going to be some more bad news.
Right.
But what was your first response to the police killing of the young man in Memphis, Tennessee? I'm sure you heard about that. And when you heard it, what was your thoughts and your feelings?
God help us. That's probably what I really thought. To be honest with you, Brother Crusoe, I'm aware of the story, but this is going to be an interesting response to this. I actually gave myself permission to not be fully invested in this story like I was with George Floyd, only because, my work is saturated in gun violence all the time, and you hear these cases. So I took a step back, and I didn't watch the police video or anything. I just couldn't take it into my spirit because it was just too much. But we are really those are 5 Black officers violently and viciously killing another Black man. I mean, I don't even know what to even really say. I mean, this country has a lot of issues that we have got to really put a hand on. Police violence is just one, you know. So I don't even know what to really say on that. It's because this keeps happening and no one's addressing it. And, it's one thing to fire them, but that does not hold them accountable for taking someone's life. So I wish I had a solution. I know what I do know is in my world, they're working on some legislation to crack down on police violence, but we know it really trickles down and it's about implementation and how will police departments really hold people accountable. So I don't know the answer. I wish I did. I think this left me at loss, just like George Floyd.
Yeah.
But the question then becomes, well, how do we show up and what do we say to something around police violence? And I'm still searching for that as well.
Yeah. Well, Sister Garner, Sister Tiffany Garner, Miss Tiffany Garner.
Yeah, Brother Chris.
Thank you for your time. Okay.
Thank you.
I appreciate you. Is there anything that you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to say? Is there anything that you would like to say before we close out? Anything?
No, I feel like this was a really good conversation. You asked me some really good questions, and
I caught you by surprise too, didn't I? Some of those questions,
some of them, but I just wanted to make sure I left on a high note about the church and just the possibilities for us. I didn't want to make sure that I don't want to harp on areas for us to improve without saying it's such a beautiful thing that we still are the light in the world, right? And we have to capitalize on that. And so this year, it's like, how are we going to be bold and show up? And so that's what also I've been praying and thinking about too, is like, what does that look like for us as a church to have a bold vision to be God's heart and hands, especially in these social issues that are just like, ooh, this is sticky and yucky. But how do we show up in those moments? So there's hope for the church, and I'm excited to see what's going to happen this year as other people are putting forth bold visions.
Well, make sure you send our congregation information on the women's seminar. That
I am.
And we'll do our best to encourage our ladies to come up north to Northern Virginia.
Come on up north.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
Well, thanks again, and we'll stay in touch, and because we still have some work to do on the gun violence thing. And
I'm here.
Okay, all right. Well, have a good one now. Okay.
All right. Take care. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right. Bye now.
Bye.
I've enjoyed Sister Tiffany Garner and looking forward to working with her and in some other areas. And we pray God's blessing upon her. And I want to thank you for watching and listening to this podcast.